Evening,
They all
everyone.
know who I am.
They all do. No need for wind up. And I wanted to show up my pretty background because, we are talking about, as I said in the tweet, my first love. Welcome to the 42 Social Club, everyone. Nam and myself are here. I even updated my background. I even got one of my favorite shirts on. I
Oh, that's
absolutely,
beautiful.
I
I
absolutely
love that.
adore this shirt. So I had to suit up, and the only thing is, I don't have a lightsaber yet. I have mini lightsabers from a friend gave me. They're actually scaled replicas, but they don't
Yeah.
show up well on screen. If you look at them in the wrong way, they look like cocktail weenies. So I won't bring them out.
Yes, sir.
Yes, but anyway, thank you again for doing this one. I'm glad we started quick because I want to hear. Obviously, I want to talk about one of my first loves, which is Star Wars: The Original Trilogy, and I love the way that you were tweeting about them because you had some takes that you were actually kind of excited to share. So, um, do you want to start with your most spicy take, or do you want to start in movie order? How would you like to go?
So I thought that before that we should like maybe lay I wouldn't say ground rules, but like I think we should take a step back and look at our positionalities, right? Like that we how we experience Star
All
Wars,
right,
right?
go ahead.
So for me, like my first like I definitely watched the original trilogy at some point, right?
Okay,
Like I just as a consumer of pop culture, but I
right.
just never remembered them growing up. Like my first Star Wars was either my first or second ever movie.
Okay,
Uh the the Phantom Menace Star Wars. Uh
got it. Okay,
so, like I am a child of the prequels. I
okay.
think that's important to note. Um, which I enjoyed, but it's been quite some time since I've sat down and watched the film seriously. And I
Mhm.
would categorize myself as somebody who knows more about Star Wars than maybe the average person because I've played Knights of the Old Republic.
Okay.
I've dabbled in all of that stuff. I've watched a little bit here and there of a lot of different series, but obviously, like I'm not what I wrote this down once in a line when I was reviewing episode 7. Like what Mark Hamill might call like ultra passionate fans. Like
Mhm.
that's obviously not me. Like I'm not a UPF by any stretch of the
Right.
imagination. But I'm a nerd, so like it's required nerd viewing to know a little bit about Star Wars, and
Right.
that's where I'm coming in with. And I thought I'd ask you, what was your like first Star Wars experience? Do you remember it? Like how old were you?
Okay. So I was 5 when it came out. And so um I just remember from the start I was always a twitchy kid when I got nervous, and so I couldn't sit still from the go. And it's just obviously, you start with the music, but then again, just that flyover the Death Star of the Star Destroyer flying over after the blockade runner, and I was just like, I could have watched that over and over and over, and I'd have been hooked from that ever since. I mean, I was obsessed with it. I mean, I think like many kids at that time that fell into Star Wars, I fell hard. There was nothing else that mattered other than Star Wars, whether I was just, whether it was conversation or trying to go see the movie. I mean, I remember there was one time there was a drive we went out to dinner like on a Thursday or Friday night, and we were driving back, and we drove past the drive-in, and it was on a screen, and I made my parents stop. I made my parents stop, and we were outside the fence, and we watched it for like 15, 20 minutes. And
Yeah,
then and then, like, my dad was like, "Alright, we're going." I'm like, "Alright," but at least I got to watch it for a little bit,
yeah.
right? And so, I remember there was one time I went to the doctor, I was sick, I stayed home, I had a fever and everything else, and I had to lift my shirt because, he had to, check the lungs and everything else, and I had drawn the Darth Vader thing on my chest. I got markers and got a square, and I just drew all that, so
That's amazing.
so
Yeah.
am I ultra passionate? I don't know if I'm off the deep end like a lot of those guys where, you know, I treat Star Wars as gospel.
Mm.
All your takes aren't gonna be treated as heresy, if you will.
Yeah.
But I mean, I it absolutely has shaped everything about my life, all the way from just actually seeing it to wanting to play an instrument and be in the band and to be an engineer and just to be surrounded by technology and loving sci-fi and outer space and everything else. And then just being a storyteller teller and voiceover work and all those aspects, it just definitely governed a lot. So for me, it's definitely been a driving force. But again, like I said, it's not, it's not infallible, right? I
Mhm.
get what some people do and don't like about it, and I don't hold that against them, right? I always say in jest, no one's perfect. But,
Yeah.
it's like if you don't like it, you don't like it. I mean, I'm not gonna, I'm sure there's something that if someone came in and said, "Well, I don't like Star Wars," well, what do you not? I'm sure there's something I don't like about what you like, but I'm not gonna bash you
Yeah.
over it, right? So, but I mean, it's definitely a very good chunk of my heart, and it always
Yeah.
has been and always will be.
First of all, thanks for sharing that with me. Like, I really like listening to you talk about your enthusiasm and your passion and like the just the joy of Star Wars for you. Like,
Right.
for my generation, that's kids of my generation, like the young millennial set, right? Like, that's probably Harry Potter. In
Yes.
terms of a world that we had never gotten to experience
Mhm.
before up until now,
Right.
a world that you probably have said, if I had to guess, at one point in your life that people will not understand Star Wars the way that you understand Star Wars as somebody who grew up on Star Wars. It
Right.
doesn't mean that there's not room on the ship,
Of course.
so to say, but like you're towards the front and you understand what all that means. So that was one thing that I drew out of
Mhm.
that. And for yourself and for listeners, I just want this on the record, is like uh what I'm going to share tonight in terms of my thoughts as like a fresh like rewatch is not so much designed to bash anything. Like, I find
Mhm.
these movies to be enjoyable, but maybe I have some interesting things to say overall that maybe are
Right.
unpopular. But like, over like, I'm not saying that it's bad in retrospect. I think there are certain things that you have to kind of adjust for era and whatnot. And
Okay.
so those disclaimers aside, I just think that because I didn't actually order my notes in anything besides like the order of the movies,
Okay.
so I just thought we'll start with uh, you know and we'll just play it by ear.
Sure.
But I'll just read some of the things that I'm thinking, and
Please.
we'll just let the conversation happen
I
organically.
love it.
So, Star Wars Episode One, classic, iconic,
Episode
or
4.
Episode Four. Sorry, the first movie, right? But like the movie that would become the fourth movie in the future. But
Right, because it didn't have that episode 4,
yeah.
till until a year later.
By the way, I watched the Disney Plus version, so that was what was available to me.
Oh, the
I know
special
that some
edition then.
I know
Okay.
that some people have very strong feelings about that, and I'd love to get your take on that.
Okay.
So, open, classic, iconic scroll. No movie should ever try to do that again, because you'd just be infringing on a territory that I think that's one of like the untouchable things about movies.
Okay, that's fair. I
I don't
agree.
know if another movie has attempted it, but I certainly wouldn't. And I've seen some of the old pictures of like how they generated this effect
Right.
originally, and so that's very cool. Obviously, the John Williams score, great, right? Like, iconic, right? Like that opening, that song, good. Um, and then I have some real issues with the first third or
Okay.
so of A New Hope. Like, I
Like
basically, up until the point where they get off of Tatooine.
okay.
So a couple of these things here, right? Like, I find it highly unbelievable, right, that Princess Leia is like, "I need you to find Obi Wan Kenobi," and Luke Skywalker's like, "Well, I know this dude named Ben Kenobi.
Mhm.
Is that the?" It's just it. And again, I have to grade on a curve because maybe like the storytelling expectations aren't as tight for
Right.
the time that is. But there's a like I think we'll come back to this a couple of times over the course of this conversation. There's
Right.
just a certain hokiness that it's charming.
Mhm.
There's a charm to it that disappears as the series gets older and
Yes.
more serious and more, uh, well, I guess, more commercialized.
It is, it's an innocence. There's an
Yeah,
absolute innocence because of when it's being written, there wasn't an expectation. There wasn't any well, you have to do this or you have to talk
Yeah.
about that, right? And the hokiness about, and this is the way I look at it, right? The hokiness of, okay, how in the hell did Leia know to find Ben Kenobi is revealed in the hologram, right? It's like, you served my father in the Clone Wars, which was just another thing that just blew my mind because I just kind of sat there like I had to follow the movie, but I'm like, Clone Wars. I mean, it's just the mind boggled as to what it could have been when
Yeah.
without having had the extended universe or the games or the books or even the new movies. You're like, what in the hell does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? But it was also somehow, some way, she knew how to find him. Right?
Yeah.
I think the thing is that looking back at it now, and it's like, okay, how in the hell does a trash can with wheels make it across a desert? That's actually one of the other things I was like, okay, but they did, right, in a
Yeah.
way, and they were able to, but it's like that's where I think a lot of the things where I go is like when I see a Star Wars movie, I really suspend belief. I mean, there's
Yeah.
just I'm just like I'm here for the ride. And even then with the new ones, I'm like I'm here for the ride. I'm not here to see some cinematic masterpiece that's going to win awards for writing or whatever in the hell else it is. I'm just here to go back to this galaxy that I adore with my heart and just go ahead and enjoy whatever happens. But
Yeah.
you're right. There's and again, I don't think George Lucas has always been known to be a stiff writer, so and a stiff director.
Yeah.
So it's just, yeah, I believe I get that. I think that's where it's just, being able to, especially with fresh eyes. I think, especially now with more context and just more, I don't want to say it's more, not more jaded, but just more experience, I guess, that we as a society have, that it's like, okay, it's, you still have to look at it as a little bit more innocent because it truly was written in that way, I guess.
Yeah. Also, like things that are things that you overlook when you're younger, or you're just not old enough to notice. Wait, this is weird. And again, it's just that first third. Like I have to give it some credit because like I saw this fantastic edit that my best friend sent me of Obi-Wan's opening speech, right? And
Okay.
you might have seen this on YouTube. It's like 6 million views of like at every moment he delivers a line like I knew your father and all of that stuff,
Yes.
right? And then in between you see the scope of like what he's experienced because it's
Right.
cut in the other pieces of the tapestry like are able to be seen, right? But if
Hmm.
we're just looking at the scene by itself,
Right.
everything is moving like 10% too fast. I feel like, and when I say that, I mean that he says all of this dialogue that I think with my 2020 lens, right, you would expect them to pause a little bit longer, to just
Oh,
let
I see
those
what you're
moments
saying.
breathe, and so that the line has the kind of appropriate gravity and
Yes.
impact. And so just in that first third, like a lot of jargon that doesn't make any like sense to anybody, right? Like I was about to go get some power converters, and like I'm just like, So that's just the first third. It's kind of rough, and then they start to get off of Tatooine, and it like,
Hmm.
uh, you know, picks up steam. And I had a couple of
Right.
questions for you
Yes.
from the first part. Uh,
Okay.
because this is something I just never got as a kid. Like, what is the big deal with who shoots first between Han and Greedo? Like, does that really matter? Like, what is that just like a thing that people argue about, or
So that's a delineation between original fans and
Mhm.
newer fans, right?
Uh-huh.
In the original movie, Han shoots first. I mean, they're just standing there. Greedo delivers the last line, and he blasts him. And that always, for me, gave you a sense of how ruthless Han Solo really could be. Right? He didn't care. He was up for himself, and he was protecting what he could. Fast forward 22 years
Mm.
when George Lucas is able to bring in the special editions, right? For some reason, and again, I think it's just again how society as a whole has softened, right? He didn't want everyone to have this perception that Han was this cold-blooded killer. But that's what made him so badass for such a long time. But it also, from a story arc perspective, and we may talk about it, it changes, right? He's such a badass from that very first moment, and then it just changes, and he's into the softer,
I
more,
see.
or not a softer. hard-nosed leader. He still has that edge to him, and it helps how he leads and as a general. But again, he's not this ruthless, smuggler, right? He's
Mhm.
grown and he's become better, and I think that's really having grown. And again, it's a gap of 22 years because there's millions of us that grew up with it with Han shooting first, and that's always the way it's been. And I think seeing Greedo shoot first, I understand why George Lucas did it. I mean, if there's a video out there of George Lucas doing I'm sorry, of a guy doing a cosplay of George Lucas, and he's holding a sign and it says "It's my movies, damn it." And so, and so he's yelling at everyone, you don't like you didn't like Greedo shooting first. It's my movie, damn it. So it's, I understand why he changed it. I don't agree with it. But that's those are
Yeah.
his movies, and that's why it was. So I think that's really the delineation, is that for many of us, we grew up with that for two decades of Han shooting
And
first.
now you want to change it.
And then all
Yeah.
of a sudden it's changed and he's a little bit softer. It's like, okay, you're diminishing who Han Solo was in our mind this entire time. So
I see.
I think that's how I think that's
Mm.
always what I've got from everyone else that I've talked to.
So, I mean, I don't have a strong feeling about that, but thank you for like the contextualization of that, right? Like, obviously, the version that I watch is like it's a simultaneous thing.
Right.
Um, so I have a couple more points that I wanted to make
Okay.
about A New Hope, since we we do want to make sure that we hit all three
Yeah.
films today. Just a couple more like nitpicking things. Luke gets the feel of a college kid, and then he loses his aunt and uncle in the invasion of their little town, and that's just another moment where the emotional gravity of that doesn't get to spiral out. And I'm interested in like if okay, and I know this is insanely sacrilege, but I don't know if I could put it past Disney at this point
Go ahead.
for them to do like a modern version, basically reshooting the original trilogy.
Okay.
I don't think it's high on their list of priorities, but I'm not ruling anything out at this point,
Mm.
because I would be interested to retell this story with like a more modern like rhythm for uh
Mm.
for like storytelling, because you can make these things hit a little bit more and give that. But again, I don't know that that's something that they're looking to get into. But like they didn't just buy $2 billion or whatever it is that they paid for LucasArts
Right.
not to consider these things. So I'm sure they've had this conversation.
Yeah.
um
But do you know where the tempo comes from, though?
I've been told, but like my friend gave me kind of the historical view of it, but I'd like to hear your explanation.
It's the John Williams soundtrack.
uh,
That's where your gravity comes from. Because if you've
uh,
watched, do not watch a Star Wars movie without the soundtrack. Just don't. Just don't even try it, because you'll be like, this movie sucks.
uh,
And it's because, again, the movie is such. I'm sorry, the music is so, and just it's like it's not the it's almost like the blood, where it helps you move and everything else. So you're
mm,
right. Yes, there isn't the long drawn out pauses, but if you listen to that
I
moment
see.
of music and weight and power, that's where you're getting the tempo from, right?
Mm,
You're not getting the pauses, but you're getting the music that's giving you the weight. So it's actually a combination of the two is really
mm,
where it's coming from. But again, like I said, George Lucas has always had a very driven, faster type of style. And so I
yeah,
think that's where you're getting that from. But again,
yeah,
if you watch it without the John Williams soundtrack, you're like, I don't even know what's going on here. Right?
yeah,
Yeah, it is too fast, right? It should slow down. Right? But now if I'm listening to with all that music behind it, now I
mm,
understand why. So
yeah. So a couple of things I did love. Obviously, the iconic two suns shot.
that sunset,
Uh,
absolutely.
loved this, like as a writer, like this little like a more elegant weapon for a more civilized age, right? Like
So good.
that's a classic like through the decades quotable. So I love that. I thought that it was very interesting that, we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago about how sci-fi tends to replicate a lot of the problems that we have on Earth, and like,
Right.
so how they treat, the Tusken Raiders and the Jawas is like low key speciesist, you know. Again, not a big deal. It was the 70s.
Right.
I'm not like canceling like posthumously like the series or anything. I just think that it ties in really nicely with what we've noticed about how sometimes people's just visions of the future only end up, continuing kind of the problems we've already have on here on Earth One.
Mirroring, yeah.
Uh yeah. Leia, I think, rest in peace to Carrie Fisher. I think for sure is the best actor in this first film. Um, no disrespect to, I think I would have Harrison Ford at 2, and
Mhm.
potentially cancelable take number 1. I don't think Mark Hamill does that much for me. I find him to be, I want to pick my words very carefully here. I don't want to say he's replaceable because he is the iconic face of Luke
Mhm.
Skywalker, but in baseball they have the metric like wins over replacement player, and I don't think that he's all that irreplaceable. If we lived in a different timeline, I think Star Wars still becomes Star Wars if they pick somebody else besides Mark Hamill.
Mm, I think see, and that's it. I think that's a fair statement.
Mhm.
If you watch everyone, I mean, if you look at the old casting reels, I
Yeah.
mean, there was all kinds of people that Ron Howard tried out for it. Um,
Wow, that would have been
Kurt Russell,
very interesting.
Kurt Russell tried out for it. So there was
Yeah.
all kinds of people that tried out for it. That it was just like he happened to be the one that was a no name, but he also had the good chemistry. He had the best chemistry there. I mean, it's one of my favorite performances, and I know we got it, and I know we only got 30 minutes, but one of my favorite performances is Peter Cushing, Grand Moff Tarkin.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a classically obviously, Alec Guinness is one of my favorites, but
Yeah.
I think he's one of those that's just he's so good. And you want to talk about someone that carries weight when they come into yeah, that was it. But
Mhm.
of the main three,
Yeah.
absolutely, I think it's Carrie Fisher is definitely the one because she was walking around and there wasn't a lot of that. I mean, there was so many things in this movie that were not sci-fi, and having
Mhm.
a badass like her that grabbed the gun and started shooting people and then got them into the trash compactor, you're like, all right, this is this is what we got. And even then,
Yeah.
Han Solo, and again, Han Solo is like, always calling her your highnessness. It's just being snarky about it, but that's part of it. But anyway, no, she was badass in there too.
All right. So overall, uh, it's an okay start, and in retrospect, and I know at some point in the future, not necessarily in a couple of weeks or whatever, but in the
Right.
future, when we get to the new trilogy discussion
Yes.
that we're going to have, I'm going to express to you again how much more infinitely more disappointed I am that they just remade the same movie. But
We've
that's
talked
for the
about that. We've
yeah.
talked about that.
Uh
Yes.
so for Empire, I think what I really like here is that they immediately changed tact. It's a very different feel of movie, and something happened in between the discussions that maybe, like, I'm assuming something happened because the dynamics that are set up are very different, right? Because if I recall correctly, you have the kind of like Luke and Leia like hinting in
Mm-hmm.
A New Hope that is then immediately like kind of like retconned. I think once they wrote more forward into the universe, they were
Right.
like, "We'll just forget that happened. We're gonna push this ship instead." Right? Um, I like uh you know some of the small things that they do here. The small shot of Vader without his helmet that we see
Right.
briefly again. That's like a whole movie and a half. Um, they weren't able to do this in the new trilogy for as long with Adam Driver's
Mm-hmm.
character with Kylo Ren. I strongly prefer CGI Yoda.
Okay.
I don't know if you wanted to sound off on that.
Um, I prefer if I had to rank my Yodas, it would be Empire Yoda and then it would be Clones Yoda, so episode 2 Yoda, and then it would be um Jedi Return of the Jedi Yoda, which is 6, and then it would be well, I forgot about Revenge of the Sith, because episode 6 Yoda is no, let me see. Episode 2 Yoda is where he actually gets to show how badass he is. So
Mhm.
that was, or is that episode 3? That's episode 3.
Yeah.
But you get to
He
see a
has the
little bit
fight with
with
the Emperor.
Sidious.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you get to see a little bit of it at the end of episode 2.
Mhm,
So at the end of episode 2, he actually has the fight with Dooku. At the end of
mhm.
3 is where you see him, go off. So I'd probably say, yeah, Empire, Clones, Sith, Jedi, and then I am not a fan of the episode 9 CGI. Or is it the episode 8 CGI Yoda? I think it's the episode
Yeah.
8. That one, he seemed a little too chubby for me.
Yeah. For me, it just has to do with kind of like the herky jerky nature of like the puppetry.
Okay.
But again, that's limits to what they're able to do technologically at that time. And I wanted to backtrack and mention like Lucas did a beautiful job, like restoring, right, and updating a lot of
Hmm.
these like modern landscape stuff is very high quality. And then there are just going to be some glaring moments that like don't fit, right? Like there's stuff that's like too HD, and like I
Mm,
think probably it's most noticeable in some of the cantina like
yeah.
scenes.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and then there's some stuff that he could not update, which is like some of the lightning effects and things like that. So it's very funny overall. But I just thought that in the when it came to restoring kind of like the natural stuff,
Right.
he failed very well. Um, in Empire, I really love the variety of landscapes that gets to expand the universe
Right.
out. Because most of what you saw at the beginning is just Tatooine, and so now we have Hoth.
Hmm.
Um, we have Dagobah, right?
Yep.
Like you get to see a variety of environments that again
Absolutely.
um, expands this world out, and it made me think how much I enjoyed the experience of like seeing Mustafar,
Mm,
like
right.
in episode 3, just like as something where the color set is so different
Yes.
than what we saw before. And then the name escapes me for episode 8. What Ryan Johnson did with the planet, where with the red sand,
Yes.
right? Like I think that those are some of my favorite looks in the Star Wars universe for
I want to
sure.
say it's Crate.
Yeah, yeah,
Crait.
yeah. And at the same time, that's kind of like Exegol has like this interesting feel, but it's
Hmm.
also entirely gray, and I don't know if that's like I don't know how many points to give him for that. So,
Exegol, and that was the thing that George Lucas always had a
mm,
vision for, is that he
mm,
always had, and if you go through all 6 of his movies,
mhm,
not 7, 8, 9,
yeah,
there's always some sort of different planet to deal with. That's somewhere. I mean, and that was the other thing, right? I absolutely adored. Now that was a one thing from the special editions. It was at the end of Jedi. That was the first time we got to see Coruscant.
mhm,
And we always heard about the Galactic Senate. We never knew where it was located, and it wasn't until I have the Time magazine someplace, and they were talking about it. I think it was from not from 83, but like 86. They like revisited it or something. And Doug Chang actually had drawn, no, it must have been closer to 97. It must have been there where he drew a picture of Coruscant. And that was the first time anyone had ever seen it. So to see it in the movie, but also to spend so much time in it in episode 1 and 2 and even 3 was brilliant. But also, like you said, we had all of the other ones like Camino, where the cloners were, right?
yeah,
And then we had Geonosis, which is where the end of um, the Clone Wars was at. Well, the end of Attack of the Clones, episode 2, was at. So there's always something there. So I think that's one of the strengths. Lucas always had was, okay, what kind of stuff can I do? And you just saw a huge, what's the word? Compilation of planets at the
Yeah.
end of episode 3, right
Yeah.
after Order 66. It was just one
Yeah.
after the other, and
You just do the super
and
cut
there
of
was
like, yeah.
so many different worlds that it's like, oh my gosh. And so I think that's really why I'm excited to get away from the Star Wars, the Skywalker saga, is to see
Yeah.
more planets like that. And I'm hopefully,
Yeah.
and even the Mandalorian's done a little bit of it, so that's why
Yeah.
I'm excited about it.
But Empire I thought did an excellent job. I didn't even mention Cloud City, which was also gorgeous. And I like that they were able to return there, for the prequels too.
Right.
Um, anyway, so variety of landscapes really expands the universe. I love the little bit where 3PO was being kept away. They had a little bit where like he was like separated and stuff like that.
Yep.
Um, and I think that Empire is for sure an objectively superior movie for me to A New
Absolutely.
Hope because the plot line for A New Hope is pretty straightforward.
Hmm.
You know?
Right.
And Empire here, they get to take a little bit more narrative risk. You have the betrayal by Lando. You have the reveal,
Hmm.
obviously, which in retrospect, people who speak German always make this joke about like, well, how did you guys not know that, right? Like,
Right.
but just overall, a much better film than A New Hope. Um, and
But
then here I'm going to pause to see if you wanted to throw anything in when it comes to talking about Empire.
I think you're absolutely right. It's the gold standard. It had been my gold standard until Rogue One came in.
Yeah.
It is, I mean, just all around. So I was, let's see, I was 8 when um, Empire came out. And so it was the first time I actually saw a movie where the bad guys won. It was the first time when I witnessed I witnessed a pseudo decapitation,
Mhm.
right? And it was the first time I actually witnessed someone lose a hand, right?
Yeah.
And so it was
Yeah.
just, but it was always things you kind of knew that a lightsaber was capable of doing, but it
Mhm.
wasn't until you actually saw it, and it was all directed by Irvin Kershner, and it was him, like you said. I think it's really where he was able to bring that just so complete view to it, to the point where you just like, yeah, they're alive, but what happens next, right? It's
Yeah.
like you're kind of like, okay, they've gotten their ass beat, so now how are they going to make this happen, right? So it was just, 3 years of spoiler free non-internet waiting, that you just had to like pull your hair out and wait for something to for the movie to come out, right? And so that's really what it was. But yeah, Empire has always been my gold standard, and it's just, that's my favorite soundtrack as well. I think it's like, I mean, if the end credits, the end credits are always one of my favorite parts of the movies, and that one, the Empire end credits, is just my abs it just, I literally, I cry when I'm hearing that last part, because there's the Leia's theme is in there, the Imperial March is in there, Yoda's theme is in there. I mean, it's just, there's so many different new elements that I think, again, John Williams is so brilliant at, that it's just, yeah, it just moves me to tears. So yes.
Definitely. Um, the only thing that let me see. Did I think about something else I wanted to add here? No, it's just a much better film. I think they had a much better idea of what they could do
Hmm.
on screen, and like the technology and the training had also
Right.
advanced because the lightsaber battles in A New Hope are, well, in a word, not great, right? Like they don't really
No.
feel like much, and I think they had a much better idea of what they could do by the time they get
Yes.
to Return of the Jedi. I think the prequels do it best, and I don't
Yes.
know if that's me being a young kid thinking that, but um,
Much better than they were the best lightsaber battles. Much
and
better
I,
than the
I
newer
I don't
series.
know why. I can't put my finger on it, and it might be something that I arrive at like once I rewatch it. But just like in terms of what feels good and iconic
Hmm.
to me, and I think that's like iconic here, I'm using that word in the same way that the Supreme Court has sometimes tried to define pornography. Like, you'll know it when you see it. You'll know it's iconic when you see it. Okay, I
Right.
remember what I was going to say now. For you, waiting those 3 years between Empire
Yes.
to Jedi, uh, on one hand, is harder because
Yes.
it's 3 years. On the other hand, much easier. No internet, right? Like I think my modern like equivalent to this is like the wait for Avengers Endgame, in which
Right.
I took 2 days off of work. Uh, one day of work, obviously, to watch the movie,
Of
but the
course.
day of work before that because I didn't want any spoilers arriving to me by way of
Mhm.
the Chinese
Of
release.
course.
So I lay there in my bed with the lights off and just like trying to sleep the hours away to this.
Right.
And I go to the theater. I'm ignoring my girlfriend. I have my headphones in.
Mhm.
I'm like, I almost heard somebody say something. So it is truly a blessing, I think, in this age to be able to enjoy something unspoiled, no
Right.
expectations, no knowledge of anything whatsoever, and so that's pretty cool. That's what life was like, waiting for this, the culmination to this first trilogy.
Right. You weren't getting constantly you weren't waiting for the alert for something new. You were like, "Okay, what can I let me go to the library and see what new magazine has what, who's saying something, right?" And even
Mm,
then, they were so good about locking everything down that, even if you got some sort of tidbit, it was relatively close to the release of the movie. And if there was anything that you got spoilered, it was usually when they would release like the novelization or
mm,
like all the kids' books. So there was a
yeah.
picture book that had the whole story and pictures from the movie. So if you turn to the right page in the Return of the Jedi storybook, you actually see the line, and that was one of the first things that I spoiled for myself when I was uh 10, 11 years old, is that Yoda confirming that Darth Vader is his dad,
Yeah.
right? I remember walking out of the movie theater with my aunt and uncle. It was probably my 13th or 14th time that I got like finagled someone to take me to the movie at 8 years old. And then it's
Yeah.
like, no, it's a lie. She's lying. And this, I'm like, I don't know, and blah, blah, blah. But it was always a conversation, but there weren't any internet forums or anything else or Reddit posts that had crazy theories that end up being proven right later, right?
Mm,
And Avi, he's on right now, and he's saying, and I think and he's right. Yeah, Lucas didn't have Vader pegged as Luke's father in the first movie at all,
mm,
right? And so I think that maybe came along as the story developed more. But no, I
yeah.
I agree with Avi.
So there's just some things like in that transition, right? I'm not familiar with the full history, but I would guess that after like they didn't expect that it was going to get as big as they did, and so they had to like tweak some things there because the narrative arc was not
Right.
clear from the start that it was going to go this way. But as we get into Return of the Jedi
Just
now,
before that, there one tidbit. There
yes,
was a novelization called Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and that's where you
uh,
first saw the Kyber crystals. That
mm,
was the first appearance of Kyber crystals. They were actually going everywhere, looking all over the place for these crystals that would focus the Force. So that's where
yeah,
the Kyber crystals in Rogue One came from. But anyway,
yeah.
but to Jedi.
Um, is that also that's also the thing that powers the lightsaber too, right?
Exactly.
So I remember that from playing Knights of the Old Republic. So,
Exactly. That's what it is.
um, which by the way, shout out to old friend HK47, and his. I'm gonna have to play those games again at some point because I never got through the second one because my Steam file like kept glitching and I
Uh
was stuck. But I do have fond memories of that game as a child. Anyway, as we get into Jedi, a couple of main notes here. I'm going to start with my big issue here
Please.
because if I have to see another like planet destroying device, uh, like at any point in this universe, I'm just like, how is this the only like dangerous thing that you can come up with?
Why?
And I know that it's like from scale, right? You're playing in the space realm, and therefore you must have something of this size.
Yeah.
But like 3 times now, they went from here's a thing that can destroy planets. Here's a second thing that destroys planets. And oh, by the way, in a 2016 we're going to give you another really big planet destroying thing. It's so lazy to me. And
If you read some of the
yeah,
novelizations, there was actually
yeah,
another one called The Sun Crusher. So that one,
unbelievable.
so I'm like,
Yeah.
although I will say this, yes, I am infuriated with that too. I'm like, yes, Han Solo, yes, everyone said, and Han Solo really negated everyone. It's like, okay, fine, it's bigger, right? That was awesome, but like you said, why you got to destroy plan? I mean, it's like what it's like why you got, and I think like I think all the Star Destroyers in the Rise of Skywalker all could destroy planets. So I'm like, is that the most frightening thing? I mean, it's just like there was I can't remember if it was a comic book series called The Knights of the Old Republic, no, or not the Knights of the Old Republic, but it was a comic book series planted like either 2 or 5,000 years before the movies. And there was it opened up and this one Sith Lord was getting chased by these people, and with the Force he destroyed two suns
Yeah.
with the Force. And so I'm like, why aren't you doing that? And I think that was my biggest thing with uh Revenge of the Sith. There wasn't enough, Force push of the lava, or anything more of the Force tricks or capabilities weren't being shown. And I think that's really one of my biggest disappointments that you always hear and read about, and other things that just never made it to the movies. And so I think that's what really, like you, one, I'm tired of seeing Death Stars and just new planet destroyers all over the damn place, and I just do something new. But
And then you have your non-Jedi characters like, "Oh, we're on a mission to blow up this thing." And I'm just like, I have to overlook it to some degree, but it's something that definitely sticks in my craw, like I have to it- I can't just totally ignore it. I'm going to like not let it impact my overall enjoyment, but I'm just like, really? Like you guys
yeah,
had 9 movies and you cuz like look, the only other comparable 9 movie saga that's continuous is obviously the Fast and the Furious, which I know uh uh like I personally enjoy, but I would never make the case that they are excellent movies or cultural touchstones or
I've
anything
only
like
seen one of those movies.
that. Yeah, they're look, uh
They're
but
mindless fun though. I mean,
yeah,
and the one I saw was Hobbs and Shaw, and I was
yeah,
entertained. And I'm like, okay, cool, moving on.
yeah. But like every movie, like you know that there are going to be cars, but you're gonna see that they're going to do something in it with the cars that you've never
Right.
seen before. The latest movie, spoilers, has them. The cars are flying now. Like they might go to space, which is something that I called like 5 years ago. It's somewhere on my timeline.
Right.
So I'm a little bit miffed that that's the direction that they went. I love the coloration of the Emperor's Guards.
Yes.
By comparison, because red is such an underutilized color in the original Star Wars palette, because you only
Absolutely.
have you know the lightsaber,
That was it.
and then that deep, like deep red that you have, and obviously the lasers, right? Which
Hmm.
is another like quirk that I don't really like, is just lasers don't have heft, you know?
Hmm.
Um that the sound that they make, the pew 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 pew, like is it's more quaint than it is dangerous. And you can't like undo all of the 30 plus years of history that have cemented that as like the sound. But uh, you
It's
know,
better than no sound, which is what they'll probably end up making anyway. It'll
yeah.
just be a flash. That's all it'll be.
Yeah. So it's just my main thing that I really like here. One of the things I really hated about, uh, or at least that disturbed me in an otherwise really
Hmm.
enjoyable Last Jedi film, in Episode 8. It was like when Carrie Fisher like flew from space, and she like activated her force powers. And I was like, where did that come from? And I realized now, like on this rewatch, that was already actually technically like viable within the canon, because
Right.
Luke is like, you have that power too, just as I have. And I'm like,
Hmm.
okay. And then the force runs strong in my family, blah blah blah.
But that was the other thing too. That was one power that I wanted to see more of. It's like, okay, let's see more people do crazy shit because of the Force, and it's like, no, we're just gonna push each other. Like, I don't.
And lightning, and occasionally use this to have long distance phone calls.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk. Let's talk telepathically. It's like, Did you ever see that movie Looper?
I did.
And so you remember when they're talking about telekinesis
Yeah.
and everyone, when TK, they called it TK, when it was discovered and everyone thought everyone's going to lose their mind. And it's just a bunch of dudes floating quarters.
Yep.
It was just a little, I mean, it's like, there were so many more things that could have been done from, but yeah, yeah, there, that could have been done and that could have been seen. But like I said, Jedi was, even though he had hundreds of millions of dollars by that time, George
Yeah.
Lucas was ready to wrap the series up.
Yeah.
Even though he had, I remember distinctly reading something. He said he had episodes 7, 8, 9 written. He had
Mm,
them written. I
mm.
don't know how much of that is actually there, but he had them written. He had a vision, and he
Yeah.
clearly had visions for 1, 2, and 3. So it was just a matter of when he started writing them and what they turn out. But I mean, in 83, 82, I guess is when they finished. No one knew what was going to happen, right? It was all about toys and everything else you could do. And there was some, you know, there was some Ewok movies and there was some cartoons after that and everything else.
Yeah.
But then come about 85, 86. 86 is when I call it's the dark times, because that's when kind of Star Wars fell off of everyone's
Mhm.
mental radar. 86 is when, and it wasn't for another 5 years until, and I was talking about this with Brad Denny, the Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn. That's what brought Star Wars back into everyone's. That's what everyone's like, oh, Star Wars, yeah, okay. And that's really what I think sparked George Lucas saying, okay, this is what I need to do. I need to do a new movie.
Mhm.
I need to do, and he always wanted to do the special editions. He always wanted to add the CGI, like we get to see some of the
Mhm.
things he didn't need to. But like you said, I think they were, some of them were good additions. But anyway,
And some of them are bad additions. So I'm glad you did just mention Ewoks here because I am familiar with the. I learned this from an episode of How I Met Your Mother, so I don't know how true it is. So I'm running it by you as my official historian, but uh, I believe what I've been told from the show is that George Lucas wanted to film Kashyyyk, but to save on budget, like he basically just created the Ewoks instead, so that you wouldn't have to spend as much on costumes.
yeah, that was it. That's what I remember too. So he had to settle. He had to
Mm,
settle. Not only, yeah. So it was. I think Kashyyyk would have been a brilliant ad. I think it was a brilliant addition in uh when did we get it? I think it was episode 3. I think it was a
mm,
brilliant addition there. It's just, he couldn't do it. He couldn't, I mean, and again, he had hundreds of millions of dollars, but he just, there was only so much he could do, because again, that's him being beholden and under the thumb of 20th Century Fox.
yeah.
And I think that's why he never did go back to Hollywood. He was like, cuz who was supposed to direct Return of the Jedi?
Mm. No, I don't.
Steven Spielberg.
Oh, wow.
He was supposed, because again, they're very dear friends, but what happened was
Yeah.
is that George Lucas had a falling out, because in the original Star Wars, you're supposed to well, I take that back. Prior to Star Wars, you had the SAG and the union, the movies and the unions had an agreement that you had to show all the actors' names as part of the credits in the front. First thing. George Lucas was like, "No. I'm doing a crawl and I'm getting right into the movie and everyone's going to happen at the end."
Mhm.
That was something no one did. And
Mm.
so now it was, so then that just created even more and more hate and static between Hollywood and George Lucas, that he was like, all right, that's why I'm moving to Northern California. That's why I'm doing my own thing. But
Yeah.
that was the other thing, is that because they were so contentious with each other, and because Steven Spielberg was in such good standing with the union and SAG and everyone else, George
Mhm.
Lucas was like, I can't do that to you. I want you to do Return of the Jedi. But could you have imagined if Spielberg did do Jedi? I mean, it would have been even better than Empire. But that's why I was hoping they would have brought him back for one of the sequels, but the newer ones.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Um, so I meant to ask that question about the Ewoks because obviously the new trilogy has its own kind of like cutesy thing that's designed. And maybe this is just me being old and jaded now that I know how commercialized everything has to be,
hmm
right? But like the existence of the Porgs is like there's something about the Ewoks that feels plausibly genuine,
hmm
right? Like even if it arrived by mistake and not intentionally, They made it work. I
They
think
did.
there's something that they made it work out of that. Uh, it is a little bit. I maybe wouldn't have ended it with the dance scene in the D plus version that they have.
Right.
Um, but I will say that I think my favorite of the originals is gonna be Return of the Jedi,
Okay.
because for me, like, I place a high value on cool martial arts stuff.
Okay.
So the sword fighting is obviously the most intense and the closest to iconic. I mean, obviously in Empire you have like the emotional fallout, right?
Yes.
But like the fight itself, the duel that they have is not uh as noteworthy.
It's intense, but it's not flashy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's just a young millennial taste, I guess, for me. But I think the other thing is like there are moments where I feel very plausibly, that the universe is at stake.
Right.
And I think if you can temporarily get me to think that that's the case, then that's a successful
Okay.
like fantasy movie. And it's
Got
very
it.
rare that a lot of superhero fantasy type things, because it's built on the construct that the good guys will eventually
Right.
win, right?
Yep.
And so Endgame, X-Men Days of Future Past does a really excellent job of this, of like actually making it feel like the heroes are kind of in danger.
Yes.
um
Absolutely.
and so for me, I think that the films like episodes 5 and 6 are fairly close together.
Mhm.
And I know that, wow, but like we could keep talking about this, but we reasonably can stop here with 5 minutes to go. So we got through all three movies in an hour.
And I think that's actually we did, and I think it's a tough because there's many more directions we could talk about,
Yeah.
right? But I mean, it's just I think that's a fair. I think all your takes are fair, right? Like I said, I may be a zealot, but I don't view you as a heathen because
Thank you.
because it's like it's definitely they're definitely not they're far from perfect, obviously, right? But they're perfect to me, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's just again that's just alignment of what it goes. And the other thing to your point about the Harry Potter, I think Marvel is
Mhm.
for these younger kids, right? Marvel
Absolutely.
is definitely what did that for them,
Yeah.
and I think that's brilliant. Where Star Wars can how do I say this? Star Wars has proven that movies can be a vehicle for successful storytelling
Hmm.
for each generation. And I don't know what the next generation is going to, I don't know what the next series is for these next generation of kids, right? Is it going
Yeah.
to be comic book based or is it going to be just hopefully it's an original series or something else like that, right? I don't know.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, because I mean, is it going to be an extension of Marvel or are my kids going to look back fondly on Marvel saying, I saw these when they first came out,
Yeah.
right? And now I'm sharing them with my kids, right? And then whatever the kids are interested in. So hopefully there's always going to be some sort of story around, but it was one line, there was one post that I saw and I carry it with me every day. No matter how bad or how bleak or how dark things are, just remember that you were alive when Star Wars was here. And you know what? That's where I take the comfort in because I can always go back and watch one of those movies. Now, I can't watch one of those movies at at the drop of a hat. I actually
You have to schedule
I have to schedule it. I have to tell everyone to shut up
it.
and don't talk to me because I don't move. I sit and I move and I absorb it all. And that's why I have cousins cousin that can watch it on a whim and it's background noise. I'm like, that's sacrilege. Star Wars is not background. I don't watch it. I don't watch it in the background and I don't watch it on TV. It's
Yeah.
that and so that's just I guess that's just my OCD. But um
It's a beautifully purist way of enjoying it. I don't like. I appreciate that, definitely.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't get to see it very often, but it's when I do. But shout out to Avinash. Thank you. Obviously, the best use of the Jedi powers was in the Clone Wars series. I still have yet to see that, although Brad Denny has told me it's fantastic, along with
Hmm.
Rebels. So that's again back to your point.
Yeah.
Me being a purist, I'm actually more about the movies. I'm not about the extended universe. I'm not about the books. I'm not about the cartoons. I'm not about a
Mm.
lot of this stuff. So I think as a fan, that kind of hinders me, but it's I think now because I do have more time in different ways to be able to consume that. I think I'll be able to. It's
Yeah,
just, you know, life would get in the way. And so I'd be
yeah,
only be able to do all that. But no, but I appreciate no, these were brilliant questions. And I can't wait to go through the prequels because the
yeah.
prequels is going to be another great conversation. But
Well, I'll tell you right now, there's just no defending like I just even in my memory, Jar Jar is just this like very corny construct that I know detracts from a lot of people's
right.
enjoyment. So I like I traditionally like over the last month and a half, like I've been on here every week or two. I think in the best interest of creating space for other, like taking an intentional step back to let other folks enjoy your company. Right. Like I really enjoy how regularly you have these like deep, meaningful conversations with folks from across the sphere of internet. Right.
Right.
So at some point in the future, maybe we take a couple weeks off, take a month off, whatever it
Okay.
is, and then we'll come back for prequel time.
All right, prequels in 4 weeks then, and then
I
Avi's saying shout out to the movie editors, and you are right because a lot of the movie editors definitely were able to save a lot of that. So hey, that's what I was gonna say. Blame the editors because they're the ones that had your timing all shot.
All right. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was a really enjoyable hour. I'm just glad that I'm still allowed on here. That I thought I said some things that might be potentially inflammatory, but I'm glad that we took it to some fun places.
We did. I'm glad, and I think the Jar Jar conversation is going to be good because now that I've gotten older, I appreciate the Jar Jar. I appreciate the Jar Jar character, but I appreciate the technology
Mm,
and performance that Ahmed Best and Jar Jar created because if you don't have Jar Jar Binks, regardless of how much you hate him as a character, you don't have Gollum. You don't have
mm,
any of those characters. You don't
mm,
have any of that because he was the
mm,
first one. What is it? Lucas pioneered that. And because
mm.
of the performance and the character, no one recognizes it. But without
Wow.
that, you don't have anything after that. You don't have any. So what is it? Andy
Andy
Circus.
Serkis owes his entire like thing to this. Yeah.
He owns his entire career to Ahmed Best
Mm,
because no one else had the vision, the time, the money, or the capability to do it like ILM did. And then as soon
mm.
as ILM did it and they proved it out, then everyone's like, "Holy shit!" And then everyone else applied it to characters that weren't as annoying, but they didn't. But they
Yeah.
didn't. But they didn't appreciate that how pioneering it truly was. So,
That's a great point, and I can't wait to come back and do this again real soon.
thank you, my man. Love you. Love your girl. Love your family. Hopefully everything's all well, and then we will stay more. I'm going to be on tomorrow, everyone. Paul Avinash, thanks for joining, and we will talk tomorrow some more. Right. So thanks, Nem. Anything you got to plug? Anything coming up?
No, just normal stuff about my life at a guy named Nam. Feel free to join along as I live my life.
Indeed, indeed.